It's a fully loaded citrus soda with cargo.
Please help me out. Those ladies could be here any second.
Easy, Squirt. It's fun for your food.
Remember those 25 items from the 90s that failed? How did we love them, then lose them so fast? These everyday things were part of our shelves, our lunches, our weekends, until they vanished without warning. What were we chasing back then? And what did we quietly leave behind? Crystal Pepsi was Pepsi's bold experiment to reinvent cola by removing everything that made it look like cola. The concept was genius on paper. Crystal clear soda with that familiar cola taste. It promised something futuristic, pure, and exciting, but instead delivered something confusing. When people took their first sip, they did not taste the future. They tasted cola that had been left out too long in a sunlit room. The marketing had gone all in, television ads with Van Halen's "Right Now" blasting in the background, sleek glass bottles, and a clean science lab aesthetic. But none of that could change the fact that the flavor was just off. It was like your taste buds were expecting a party and got a PowerPoint presentation instead. Consumers did not know what to do with it. Was it a health soda? Was it supposed to be a new lifestyle? Why fix something that was never broken? That confusion was its downfall. Within 2 years, it was gone from shelves, never to be seen again, except in retro countdowns like this one. Some people still remember the taste, others only remember the disappointment. Crystal Pepsi wasn't just a product, it was a moment. A clear window into what happens when branding gets too clever for its own good. It tried to give us something new, but sometimes clarity is overrated. The Arch Deluxe was McDonald's way of saying, "Hey adults, fast food can be fancy too." They wanted a premium burger, something with dignity. This was not for kids with Happy Meals. It had a sesame seed bun with a little more flair, lettuce that looked like it came from a farmer's market, and a Dijon mustard sauce that tried so hard to feel gourmet. McDonald's spent more than $100 million to convince Americans this burger was worth growing up for, but no one was buying it. The taste was fine, the look was passable, but the vibe was all wrong. People go to McDonald's for speed, convenience, and comfort food, not to feel like they're ordering from a country club snack bar. The Arch Deluxe wanted to be a bridge between fast food and fine dining, but it fell flat somewhere in the middle. It was too expensive for a drive-through indulgence and too familiar to be premium. Kids didn't want it. Adults didn't want it. It was a burger without a home. McDonald's quietly pulled it off the menu, but not before the entire nation saw them try and fail to redefine what a burger should be. It remains one of the most expensive flops in fast food history. Sometimes a burger is just a burger, and no sauce, no matter how grown up, can change that. The Nintendo Virtual Boy looked like a spaceship crashed into a pair of binoculars and decided to play games. Released in the mid-1990s, it was Nintendo's leap into virtual reality, except it did not leap so much as stumble. Players had to shove their faces into a visor mounted on a little stand like they were doing a weird science experiment. The display? Glowing red wireframe graphics on a black screen? That was it. No color, no depth, just eye strain and headaches. And yes, people really did complain about headaches. It was supposed to be portable, but you could not move your head while using it. It was supposed to be immersive, but most games barely lasted 30 minutes before your eyes begged for mercy. Nintendo hyped it up as the future of gaming. The reality was a lonely desk toy that cost too much and delivered too little. Sales were disastrous. Fewer than 1 million units sold. Even die-hard Nintendo fans stayed quiet about this one. It was discontinued within a year, swept under the rug like a secret no one wanted to admit. But Virtual Boy did one thing right. It showed Nintendo where not to go. Today, it lives on as a cautionary tale. A strange relic from a time when red lines and motionless goggles were somehow considered cutting edge. The Virtual Boy did not fail quietly. It failed in bright, flashing red. Zemo was what happened when someone tried to make beer but decided to dress it in nightclub lighting and call it sophisticated. Born in the age of frosted tips and plastic chokers, Zemo was a clear malt beverage that promised to be different. And different it was. It looked like fancy water, tasted like soda trying to be cool, and had the branding of a rejected boy band. The commercials were slick and edgy, targeting 20-somethings who were too hip for beer but too broke for cocktails. But the taste? That strange, citrusy, chemical aftertaste lingered longer than it should have. People tried to like it. Really. It became the ironic drink of choice at parties for a little while. But deep down, everyone knew this was not going to last. Zima did not fit anywhere. It was not beer. It was not a wine cooler. It was just there. Like someone showed up to the party in a tuxedo and flip-flops. Sales dropped off fast. By the late 1990s, Zima was being phased out, replaced by actual drinks people enjoyed. It made a brief comeback in the 2010s for nostalgia's sake, but even then, the reaction was mostly laughter. Zima wanted to be the drink of the future. Instead, it became the joke of the past. Microsoft Bob was not a person, but it sure tried to act like one. Introduced in the mid-1990s, Bob was supposed to make computers friendlier for beginners. Instead, it made them unbearable. The idea was to turn your screen into a cartoon house, complete with a golden retriever assistant and rooms you had to click through to find your apps. It was like playing a game you never asked to play, just to open your word processor. Bob smiled a lot. He asked if you needed help. He was the digital neighbor no one invited. Microsoft thought people wanted personality in their software. What they actually wanted was speed and simplicity. Bob was clunky, slow, and too cutesy for its own good. It turned every basic task into an awkward journey through fake furniture and talking clipboards. And it required more processing power than most home computers could handle. That was the final nail. Bob vanished quietly after a year, never to be heard from again, except maybe in those late-night YouTube lists of tech fails. Microsoft learned its lesson eventually. They gave us Clippy a few years later, and somehow even Clippy made more sense. Bob was not just a failure, it was a reminder that good intentions do not always make good software. Sometimes less really is more. Okay. Soda was Coca-Cola's attempt to be ironic before anyone really understood what irony was. Released in the early to mid-1990s, OK Soda was marketed to disaffected teens with phrases like, "Everything is going to be okay," and surreal artwork on the cans. It looked like a zine had a baby with a philosophy class. The drink itself was grayish, vaguely citrus-flavored, and immediately forgettable. But the marketing? Oh, the marketing. It leaned so hard into Gen X cynicism that it collapsed under its own weight. Instead of saying, "This drink is great," it said, "This drink might be fine, or not. Whatever." That kind of thing might work in a college dorm room conversation, but not in a supermarket aisle. Teens were confused, parents were unimpressed, and Coca-Cola realized way too late that trying to be cool by pretending not to care is still trying to be cool. OK Soda never went nationwide. Sales were soft, reviews were lukewarm at best, and by the end of the decade, it was gone. It tried to speak for a generation and ended up talking to itself. OK Soda was more of a mood than a product, and moods, like trends, fade fast. Earring magic. Ken was a Barbie doll accessory turned cultural controversy that no one at Mattel saw coming. Released in 1993, this version of Ken came with a lavender mesh shirt, a leather vest, bleached hair, and, most notably, a necklace that looked an awful lot like a piece of adult jewelry worn in certain circles. Mattel said it was just a ring on a chain. Critics, comedians, and most of the internet disagreed. The fashion world had a field day. Late-night television could not stop talking about it. Parents were confused. Kids were just trying to play. Ken had never been so edgy or so unintentionally controversial. Sales actually went through the roof at first. Then Mattel pulled the doll from shelves without a word. It became a collector's item almost overnight. But the bigger story was how one plastic doll sparked a national conversation about representation, identity, and what happens when corporations try to be trendy without understanding the trend. Earring magic. Ken was a doll, sure, but it was also a moment, a very 1990s moment. The kind you remember not because it worked, but because it absolutely did not. The Apple Newton was supposed to be your digital assistant. Instead, it became your very expensive paperweight. Released in the early 1990s, the Newton promised to take notes, schedule meetings, and recognize your handwriting. The problem? It barely understood anything you wrote. You could jot down "buy milk," and it might decide you meant "bug silk." People mocked it endlessly, especially after a famous cartoon made fun of the Newton's glitchy handwriting recognition. It was also big, bulky, heavy, like a pocket computer that did not really fit in your pocket. Apple was ahead of its time, but the tech just was not there yet. The Newton ran out of battery life fast, cost several $100s, and crashed often. For early adopters, it was both exciting and exhausting. Apple quietly discontinued it after Steve Jobs returned to the company. He reportedly hated the idea. But even with all its flaws, the Newton walked so that later devices like the iPhone and iPad could run. It failed, yes, but it failed forward. Still, in the 1990s, it was one more product people bought with hope and returned with disappointment. Surge was Coca-Cola's answer to Mountain Dew, and it came screaming out of the 1990s like a skateboard made of neon lightning. It was loud, bright green, and packed with sugar and caffeine. Marketed to extreme teens doing extreme sports, it wanted to be the drink that fueled your inner rebel. The ads had people jumping off rooftops and yelling about adrenaline. But the flavor? A citrusy punch to the face followed by a sugary afterburn. For some, that was perfect. For most, it was too much. Parents hated it. Schools banned it. And once the energy drink wave hit in the 2000s, Surge just seemed kind of childish. Sales dipped, then plummeted. Coca-Cola pulled it from shelves before the decade ended. It had a brief comeback in the 2010s thanks to online petitions, but the magic never returned. Surge was a relic from a time when everything was extreme, in all caps. It tried to be a lifestyle, but it turned out to be just a drink, and not a great one. Snackwell's fat-free cookies were the miracle snack that promised everything and delivered nothing. In the 1990s, fat was the enemy. So when Snackwell's introduced cookies with zero fat, people went wild, boxes flew off the shelves, moms filled pantries. It was like you could finally have dessert without guilt. But what no one mentioned was that to make up for the missing fat, Snackwell's added loads of sugar. The cookies tasted sweet but weirdly hollow, like someone had baked them in a lab. And instead of stopping at 2 or 3, people ate half the box, thinking it was fine because, hey, zero fat, right? That led to what dietitians later called the Snackwell effect, when you overeat foods that seem healthy but really are not. Sales boomed, then crashed. The brand faded, the diet myth was exposed, and everyone quietly moved on. Snackwell's was not just a snack. It was a symbol of how badly we wanted to believe in shortcuts. Tamagotchi video game console, also known as Tamastation, was the awkward cousin of the original Tamagotchi toy, a clunky home console that somehow missed the charm entirely. By the late 1990s, Tamagotchi had already captured hearts and keychains everywhere. Kids raised digital pets in their pockets, and that was the magic. The Tamastation tried to drag that magic into the living room, and it just did not work. Instead of quick interactions and beep alerts, the console version slowed things down, added more mechanics, and took away the very thing that made Tamagotchi special: portability. Now you were babysitting a digital blob on a television, and you could not even sneak it into school. The graphics were simple, even for the time, and the gameplay was repetitive. You fed, cleaned, and disciplined your creature, again and again, while sitting on the floor staring at a screen. Parents were not impressed, kids got bored, and retailers could barely give the system away. Tamagotchi lived and breathed in tiny moments, those anxious beeps in your backpack, the rush of checking in between classes. Tamastation flattened all that into a dull, stationary routine. It did not feel like a pet anymore. It felt like homework. The Reebok Pump 2.0 thought it was the future of sneakers, but it ended up being the sequel nobody wanted. The original Reebok pumps were iconic. Press the tongue, inflate the fit, walk into gym class like you were from another planet. They were fun, flashy, and just different enough to work. But when Reebok brought them back in the mid-1990s, everything felt off. The look was bulkier, the tech was glitchier, and the whole gimmick had already run its course. By then, kids were moving on to sleeker styles, and athletes were endorsing newer, better performance shoes. The Pump 2.0 tried to revive a trend that had no pulse. The inflating mechanism often broke. The shoes were expensive, and worst of all, they just were not cool anymore. They felt like a rerun of a show that had one good season. Reebok thought nostalgia would carry it, but even in the 1990s, people were already looking ahead. The Pump 2.0 was like showing up to a rave wearing a fanny pack full of cassette tapes. No one hated it, but no one wanted it either. Burger King's dinner baskets were the fast food equivalent of trying to wear a tuxedo to a backyard barbecue. In the early 1990s, Burger King launched a line of sit-down style meals meant to turn a quick stop into a restaurant experience. You could get fried shrimp, a baked potato, or even a dinner roll, served in a plastic basket at a plastic table. The idea was to make fast food feel like fine dining. But here's the thing. No one goes to Burger King for a quiet, candlelit night out. People want burgers, fries, and a paper crown, not a cafeteria-style surf and turf. The campaign even had commercials with people choosing table service at the counter. It all felt forced. It was fast food pretending to be something it never was. The basket slowed down service, confused customers, and required more staff training. And while Burger King hoped it would compete with casual diners, all it really did was remind people that if they wanted a real dinner, they could just go to one. Within months, the baskets were gone. Burger King went back to basics, and the whole dinner basket era became a punchline in corporate marketing history. Sony Minidisc was the future of music for about 5 minutes. Released in the early 1990s, it offered better sound than cassette tapes and was more durable than compact discs. But here's the catch. It was late to the party and way too early for the next one. Mini discs were expensive, the players were clunky, and the discs themselves were tiny square cartridges that looked cool but confused buyers. While Sony was trying to push this new format, CD burners hit the market. Suddenly, people could make their own music mixes at home, on a format they already understood. Then the MP3 player showed up. And just like that, the mini disc had no reason to exist. Sony kept trying, releasing better players and slashing prices. But the damage was done. Consumers had already moved on. What was supposed to be the next big thing in audio ended up as a weird in-between product that nobody asked for. The mini disc had a moment, but that moment got swallowed by technology's faster pace. It was not bad. It was just out of place. HarleyDavidson Perfume sounds like a prank, but it was real. In the 1990s, Harley-Davidson, the kings of asphalt and chrome, decided to branch out into the world of fragrance. Imagine leather, exhaust, sweat, and floral notes. That is kind of what they were going for. The perfume line came in sleek, dark bottles with branding that screamed rebellion. But the actual scent? Not exactly biker chic. Reviews were mixed, leaning toward brutal. People expected something bold and rugged. What they got was somewhere between department store tester and motor oil with cologne. Harley fans were confused. Non-Harley fans were uninterested, and within a couple years, the line was discontinued. The company returned to what it did best: motorcycles, jackets, and attitude. Harley-Davidson Perfume tried to bottle a lifestyle, but you cannot spray freedom on your neck. Planet Hollywood merchandise was the moment when celebrities decided they could sell you a restaurant and a t-shirt at the same time. The idea was fun. Go eat a burger next to Sylvester Stallone's boxing gloves. Take a picture with a Terminator robot. Then stop by the gift shop on your way out. Back then, owning a Planet Hollywood shirt felt like having a backstage pass to pop culture. People wore them on school trips, to malls, and even on vacation, like they were in some kind of Hollywood fan club. Celebrities like Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger made it feel cool just by being involved. But when the hype wore off, so did the appeal. And no one wanted to wear a souvenir from a restaurant that suddenly felt empty. The merchandise was everywhere: t-shirts, jackets, mugs, even watches. It was all branded with a bright blue planet and big red letters. For a while, people loved it. Wearing Planet Hollywood gear felt like a souvenir from something bigger. But by the late 1990s, the novelty wore off. The food was overpriced, the memorabilia was getting dusty, and suddenly the shirts felt a little desperate. It became more about branding than experience. Tourists stopped buying. Stores stopped stocking. And the merchandise, once seen on red carpets, ended up on clearance racks. Planet Hollywood wanted to be a lifestyle brand. But in the end, it was just another celebrity business that got too big too fast. Mortal Kombat action figures were a weird clash of violence and plastic smiles. The video game was legendary for its brutality: fatalities, blood sprays, spine removals. And then someone said, "Let's make toys for kids." In the 1990s, the Mortal Kombat craze was real. But translating that into Saturday morning toy aisles, that was a stretch. These were not your average action figures. They were meant to be fierce, but ended up looking like stiff, awkward caricatures. The joints barely moved, the paint jobs were rough, and the packaging felt like it was designed by someone who had never actually played the game. The lack of blood or grit took away the one thing that made Mortal Kombat, well, Mortal Kombat. Kids who loved the games quickly got bored. Parents who disapproved of the games were not about to buy the toys either. The figures looked stiff, the faces were off, and the accessories broke too easily. Parents were already nervous about the game. The toys made it worse. And let's be honest, how do you play Finish Him with a plastic doll? The edge was gone. The danger was missing. Mortal Kombat without gore felt like a lion in a tutu. Sales were soft. The figures got clearanced out. And even the die-hard fans moved on. Mortal Kombat ruled the arcades, but it never conquered the toy shelf. Flavored bottled water, especially stuff like Fruitopia water, was the 1990s trying to make hydration trendy. These drinks were everywhere: bright labels, funky names, tropical promises. But the flavor? Almost always disappointing. It tasted like someone whispered a fruit's name into a glass of water. You wanted mango? You got water with a hint of label design. These drinks were promoted as healthier alternatives to soda, but the sugar content still made nutritionists roll their eyes. And the worst part was, they just did not taste good. Not bad, not gross, just forgettable. And that's what doomed them. People forgot. There was mango, supposedly, strawberry maybe, and citrus if you used your imagination. People wanted something light, refreshing, different from soda. But this was just sad juice. It sat in vending machines next to actual Fruitopia, and no one knew why it cost the same. Kids bought it once, adults tried it twice, and then everyone went back to iced tea or vitamin water. The bottles lingered on shelves, slowly gathering dust and side eyes. By the end of the decade, most of these off-brand waters were discontinued. You cannot just put a fruit on the label and expect people to taste it. Talk Boy FX Plus was the sequel nobody needed to the gadget everyone loved. After the original Talk Boy skyrocketed in popularity thanks to a certain holiday movie, kids everywhere wanted one. It was fun. It worked. It made you feel like a spy. So naturally, someone decided to make a new version with more buttons, more sound effects, and less charm. The FX Plus added cheesy voice clips and preloaded jokes, but none of the magic that made the original so beloved. It was all noise, no creativity. The recorder felt less like a tool for imagination and more like a gimmick. Half the sound effects barely worked, and when they did, they got old by the third time you heard them. The FX Plus added fake voice clips, blaster sounds, and preset pranks, but it missed the point entirely. The joy of the original was in recording your voice, slowing it down, playing it back. The FX version felt manufactured, less personal. Parents were annoyed by the noise. Kids lost interest fast, and stores quickly realized that nostalgia is hard to upgrade. Talkboy FX Plus became a short-lived novelty that could not live up to its predecessor. Sometimes more is just too much. Fanny Packs with built-in radios were a weird intersection of fashion and function that somehow satisfied neither. In the 1990s, Fanny Packs were already teetering on the edge of acceptability. Add a radio? Now you had a bulky belt with antennas poking out and wires getting tangled in your shirt. The idea made sense. Carry your stuff, listen to music, look cool. But the reality was tangled cords, weak sound, and a battery compartment that refused to open without a screwdriver. You'd try to tune the radio, only to hear static and frustration. It looked like it belonged in a sci-fi parody, not a school hallway. The radio made the fanny pack heavier, clunkier, and more annoying to wear. And no amount of neon could make it worth the hassle. The audio quality was bad, the controls were tiny, and replacing the batteries required surgical precision. Most kids ditched the headphones. Most adults ditched the whole thing. It became a gag gift, a white elephant prize, a punchline. Fanny Packs eventually came back into style, but the radio version stayed buried in the past, exactly where it belonged. America Online TV, or AOL TV, was one of those ideas that looked shiny on the outside, but left you completely lost once you turned it on. Launched at the end of the 1990s, it promised to bring the internet to your television. Think email, chat rooms, and web browsing with a remote. Sounds futuristic, right? Except it was clunky, hard to navigate, and ran slower than dial-up in a thunderstorm. The idea was that anyone could access the web without a computer, but what you got was a basic interface that barely loaded websites and a keyboard remote that felt like a rejected game controller. Add to that a monthly subscription fee, hardware costs, and the fact that most people were already learning how to use regular computers. It just did not stand a chance. The screen resolution made text hard to read. The web experience was stripped down and awkward. Even checking your AOL email felt like it took forever. And with cable television already serving up hundreds of channels, the novelty of browsing the internet from your couch wore off fast. It was too expensive for casual users and too limited for tech fans. AOL bet big on merging television with online life, but they bet before the world was ready. Within a couple years, it quietly disappeared, leaving behind a few dusty set-top boxes and a lesson in being just a bit too early and far too slow. AOL TV was the future of frustration. Laserdisc for home movies sounded like a dream if you had never actually held one. Bigger than a vinyl record and twice as fragile, Laserdiscs were meant to offer pristine video quality, chapter skipping, and no rewinding. In the 1990s, it seemed like they might actually take off. But the truth? It was way too much hassle for too little gain. The players were expensive, the discs were heavy, and a lot of movies had to be flipped halfway through. That's right. You were watching your favorite film, and then it was time to stop, eject, and turn the disc over like a giant pancake. And while the quality was better than VHS, it was not that much better, not enough to justify the price tag. You also could not record your own videos on Laserdisc, which meant it was strictly for pre-made content. That might have been fine in a rental store, but for families with camcorders and home movies, it had no place. Most people stuck with their trusty VHS tapes. They were smaller, cheaper, and you could record your kid's piano recital without a film school budget. Laserdiscs ended up becoming a niche collector's item, loved by diehards but ignored by the masses. It had the look of the future but none of the convenience. And in a world where convenience wins every time, Laserdisc quietly lost. Easy Squirt. Colored ketchup was a fever dream bottled up in a plastic squeeze tube. Released by Heinz in the early 2000s but born from the boldness of 1990s food marketing, this ketchup came in neon green, purple, pink, and even mystery colors. The idea? Make mealtime fun again, for kids at least. But what started as a novelty quickly turned into a weird science project gone wrong. The ketchup still tasted like ketchup, but the color, your brain could not handle it. Green ketchup on fries looked like alien goo. Purple ketchup on a hamburger looked like a prank. Parents were baffled. Some kids loved it, until they didn't. The thrill wore off after the third time your plate looked like a melted crayon box. And let's not forget that it stained everything. Your hands, your clothes, your soul. It also came out slower, had a strange smell, and just felt wrong. The product had big early sales but fell off fast. Within a few years, Heinz pulled the plug. Turns out we like ketchup red. It does not need to sparkle or glow. It just needs to be familiar. Easy Squirt tried to color outside the lines and ended up splattering the whole page. Pogs branded cereal was what happened when a toy craze got so big, someone said, "Hey, let's make it edible." By the mid-1990s, Pogs were everywhere. Cafeterias, recess, backpacks, lunchboxes. Kids flipped them, traded them, and hoarded them like treasure. So naturally, a cereal was next. The box was loud, full of color, and came with collectible Pogs tucked inside. But the cereal? Forgettable. It was vaguely fruit-flavored, a little too sweet, and had the texture of cardboard if you waited more than a minute to add milk. It was not made to be delicious. It was made to sell Pogs. And while that worked, for about a month, kids quickly realized they could just buy Pogs and skip the breakfast disappointment. Parents hated buying a full box of cereal just for a plastic disc. Eventually, the Pogs fad burned out, and so did the cereal. Stores cleared it off the shelves. Kids moved on to newer, shinier trends. And breakfast, thankfully, went back to tasting like food instead of a marketing stunt. Pogs cereal was less about flavor and more about frenzy. Once the frenzy faded, so did the product. The Nickelodeon Time Blaster alarm clock looked like it fell out of a cartoon and acted like it too. This wild plastic contraption exploded onto shelves in the 1990s with bright colors, jagged edges, and that signature slime green attitude. It screamed Nickelodeon, literally. The clock was meant to wake kids up with quirky sound effects, funky music, and flashing lights. But in practice, it was chaos. The buttons were tiny. The alarms were loud, too loud, like jet engine loud. Setting the time felt like solving a puzzle, and if you made one mistake, good luck getting it back on schedule. It also had a microphone that let you record a custom wake-up call, but that feature broke often and usually just played static. Batteries drained fast and the whole thing took up half the nightstand. It looked cool, it just didn't work cool. Parents got tired of it, kids got frustrated. And pretty soon, the Time Blaster ended up where most noisy toys go, stuffed in a closet, missing a battery cover, and covered in dust. For a brief moment, it made waking up feel like a Nickelodeon game show. But by the third morning of siren sounds and scrambled time zones, you just wanted to go back to sleep. Aurora slot cars were a must-have for every young speedster in the 1960s. The bright colors, snappy bodies, and twisting plastic tracks brought the thrill of racing right into the basement. You'd plug in the controller, slam the trigger, and watch your tiny car whip around the corners like it was chasing the Indy 500. But that thrill came with some unintended side effects. The motors inside those early models ran hot. Too hot. After a few laps, some would overheat and melt the chassis, leaving a smoking puddle where your prized vehicle once sat. Others sparked at random, shooting little arcs of electricity that looked cool, until they scorched your hand. And since the cars were often left plugged in for hours, the plastic casings warped, cracked, or fused with the tracks. Some even caught fire. Parents started noticing the smell first, that sharp, burnt plastic scent that lingered like a warning. Eventually, complaints piled up and multiple models were recalled. But for kids, those slot cars were irresistible. Speed came first, safety came second, or not at all. And if melting race cars weren't shocking enough, just wait until you remember what dads used to do on the roof with a metal rod during a thunderstorm. Before it made video game history, Coleco was just trying to survive. The Connecticut Leather Company, yes, that is what Coleco stood for, started with shoes and evolved into above-ground pools, plastic toys, and electronic gadgets. In the 1970s, it was everywhere, but it was never dominant, always chasing trends. Then came the video game boom. ColecoVision arrived and gave the company its first real taste of national success. The graphics were better. The games felt fresh. For a brief moment in the early 1980s, Coleco looked unstoppable. It felt like they had finally found their niche, a lane where they could lead instead of follow. But success came faster than the company could stabilize, but it did not last. The video game crash of 1983 hit like a hammer. Coleco overextended, banking on a market that evaporated almost overnight. It tried to pivot again, launching the Cabbage Patch Kids dolls, which sold in the millions. But lightning rarely strikes twice. Manufacturing problems, patent lawsuits, financial strain. By the end of the decade, Coleco was bankrupt, sold off, dismantled, and the dreams of a plastic empire turned to dust. For anyone who grew up in that era, Coleco was part of the magic, part of the joy, part of the fall. Lewis's Lunch in New Haven, Connecticut, was opened after the days of Antoine and Parker's findings, though it was still around when they were kicking. First touching American soil in 1895, this restaurant is special, even among this list of industry pioneers and innovators. Why is that so? Because, well, if a hamburger has helped you at any point in your life, and I know it's saved me on the worst days of mine, then we both have Lewis's Lunch to thank. The legend goes like this. The founder, Louis Lasson, made the first ever American hamburger when he had to put ground beef between two slices of bread to serve a customer in a big rush. And this caught on so well that it became the format for just about the next 2 centuries for American eating. I mean, I'm sure we'll still be eating hamburgers well into 2095. The simplicity of Louis' Lunch makes it a knockout with its loyal fan base, who know what they come for and pay to get and are perfectly content with the formula. A very, if it isn't broke, don't fix it kind of approach, but one that's worked well. Keeping ties strong with the loyal customer base you've built is as legitimate a strategy as expanding menus and trying out new experimental foods. And Louis' White Toast and Only Cheese hamburgers are an American classic that will never leave the history books. If your eyes ever hurt walking into a 1970s kitchen, the culprit was probably the floor. Vinyl flooring in that era came in every wild pattern imaginable. Psychedelic swirls, checkerboard grids, paisley overlays that looked like melted wallpaper. It was meant to be durable, stylish, and easy to clean. In reality, it cracked, peeled, and clashed with every furniture update you attempted. Over time, the colors faded to an uncertain gray or yellowed from the sun. Families tried to cover them with throw rugs, but the damage was already done. The designs did not age gracefully. They just became harder to ignore. What was once considered expressive quickly felt chaotic and cheap. And yet, it was impossible to walk through a suburban home without seeing those dizzying tiles in at least one room. It was design overload from the ground up. But if you think that was bad, wait until you see what we were proudly hanging on our walls. Television antennas in the 1960s were a test of both engineering skill and sheer audacity. You'd climb up on the roof with a giant metal rod, twist it until the static cleared, and shout down to someone inside for feedback. A little to the left. No, now it's worse. Back the other way. It was like guiding a spaceship with zero safety precautions. Most of these antennas weren't grounded properly. That meant if lightning struck, and it did, it would travel straight through the antenna, down the roof, and into your home. More than one dad became an unexpected conductor trying to adjust the Sunday game signal mid-storm. Even without lightning, a fall from the roof was a very real danger. These weren't lightweight aluminum poles. They were heavy, sharp-edged contraptions bolted to chimneys or mounted precariously with hopes and prayers. Some families installed them with rope and ladders. Others just sent up the most agile family member. Signal boosts meant the difference between watching your favorite show and enduring snow-filled fuzz, so the risk seemed worth it. But what started as a harmless adjustment often turned into a near-death experience. And if you think the antenna was risky, just wait until you remember the glue that smelled so strong it knocked kids out before the models were even finished. Plymouth was never the flashiest name on the road, but it was trusted, reliable, American. It was the car your uncle fixed up in the driveway, the station wagon that took families to the Grand Canyon, the compact that young drivers learned to parallel park with. In the 1970s, Plymouth had already seen better days, but there was still hope. Then the market shifted. Gas prices spiked, Japanese imports hit harder and faster than anyone expected, and Plymouth's offerings started to feel outdated. Chrysler focused its attention elsewhere. Dodge got the performance, Chrysler got the luxury, and Plymouth got what was left. People still bought them, but it felt like settling. You were not proud to drive a Plymouth. You were just glad it still ran. Sales dipped. Innovation stalled. Even iconic models like the Duster could not save the brand. The writing was on the wall. By the 1990s, Plymouth was a forgotten middle child, unloved and unnecessary. In 2001, Chrysler officially pulled the plug. For decades, Plymouth had been a quiet part of the American story. And now, it is a footnote. But the memories remain, in faded photos, old commercials, and the sound of an engine that will not come back. Puppin Taco was a pretty wonderful place if you were an avid taco lover, and I gotta say, there wasn't as much of that as there should have been in 1956. Hot dogs, tacos, and a variety of flavored slushies meant that it captured a lot of Mexican fans. They were always looking for places that did an authentic mean taco anyway, and now they had found one. Plus, the entire menu was kind of a brave mix of Mexican-style cooking and spices and American comfort foods, which was an idea that wasn't really being explored too much by other places yet. The hybrid menu was one of the first concepts that mixed cuisines like that, and it would become a popular staple format that other places like Del Taco would end up following too. The items were affordable, simple, and varied, which were the keys to making a good fast food place back then anyway. It was meant to be aimed at a younger audience, preferably adults in their 20s who wouldn't have the budget for fancy dining or proper full-course meals but still wanted a bite they could really feel deep in their bones. Harvest Gold was never meant to be subtle. It was loud, it was proud, and for one strange decade it coated every surface of the American kitchen. Paired with avocado green or orange, it was not just a color, it was a statement. You would find it on fridges, ovens, mixers, even your mom's favorite Tupperware. Advertisements promised it would bring warmth and cheer. But step into a Harvest Gold kitchen today, and it feels less like nostalgia and more like stepping inside a mustard bottle. The brightness that once felt cheerful began to feel aggressive, like a room that never let you relax. It faded fast, stained easily, and always seemed to clash with whatever came after. Like Avocado Green, it was an attempt to blend nature and futurism, and it failed at both. Once natural light hit a Harvest Gold refrigerator, the whole room seemed to glow with the hue of old mustard. Families tried to modernize around it, but nothing could mute the glare. And when the 80s arrived with chrome and pastels, Harvest Gold became the aesthetic equivalent of showing up in bell-bottoms to a wedding. Still, at least it stayed in its own space. The next design trend went everywhere and reflected everything. Candy cigarettes were a sugar-coated pipeline to adult bad habits. They came in little cardboard boxes that looked exactly like the real thing, filtered, flip-top, even with red tips to mimic a burning end. You'd pull one out, tap it against your hand like you'd seen in movies, and blow out a puff of cornstarch smoke that made you feel like the coolest kid on the block. They were sweet, chalky, and totally addictive, in flavor and in fantasy. For kids, they weren't just candy, they were props. You could strut around pretending to light up with confidence, then crunch it down in a few bites. Parents mostly shrugged. After all, it was just sugar, right? But looking back, these treats weren't as innocent as they seemed. The candy industry leaned into the trend with flashy packaging and even cartoon mascots, as if every 7-year-old needed their own pack of pretend smokes. But while candy cigarettes were bad enough, things got even more blatant once actual cigarette brands wormed their way into children's programming with smooth voices, catchy jingles, and cartoon cowboys who sold more than just action. Datsun was everywhere in the 1970s. Sleek, reliable, affordable. The kind of car your neighbor drove, your cousin saved up for, and your dad secretly liked better than his American sedan. It was Japan's Trojan horse into the United States market, and it worked brilliantly. But success brought identity problems. Nissan, its parent company, wanted global consistency. They did not want to be Datsun in one country and Nissan in another. So in the early 1980s, the decision was made: rebrand. Slowly, Datsun vanished. The name was pulled from brochures, badges, and showrooms. And just like that, a brand that millions had trusted was gone. People were confused. Dealerships had to explain that Nissan and Datsun were the same. Some buyers walked away. The transition was rocky, and for a while, Nissan lost ground in the market it had fought so hard to win. Looking back, the choice makes sense. But it still feels like something was stolen. A name, a memory, a piece of the road. The Burger Chef was definitely like that. It wasn't even that long ago that it was formed, sort of. Do you think 70 years is long? It was in 1954 in Indianapolis, Indiana, where Burger Chef was first founded, and it was by the 1960s that it grew to rival McDonald's, the only competitor left in America that was still bigger than it. It had over 1,000 locations, and it was the first fast food joint to introduce things like the Fun Meal, which was a pretty draft version of what would go on to be the kids' meal format that a lot of places would adopt. Actually, it wouldn't just inspire that. It even gave McDonald's a heads up and gave them the idea to whip up the Happy Meal and tap into all that unexplored kids' menu market. It didn't last that long. Burger Chef ended up being sold off by its owners in the mid-1980s, so it was only around for some 30-odd years. Even in that little amount of time, it managed to completely change fast food as we know it. The kitchen was the heart of the 1970s home, and Avocado Green was its crown jewel. At least, that is what the designers claimed. Appliances from toasters to refrigerators were coated in this earthy green, a color meant to feel natural and calming. But instead of evoking gardens and freshness, it often made kitchens feel dim, claustrophobic, and permanently stuck in the past. Imagine walking into a kitchen where every appliance matches the color of an overripe avocado. At the time, it felt sleek, stylish. But once that color started to fade, or clash with updated counters and cabinets, it became painfully clear that Avocado Green was never going to age gracefully. What once felt trendy now felt like a permanent bad decision baked into your kitchen. As tastes shifted toward lighter, brighter spaces, Avocado Green quickly became a design cliché. By the time the 1980s rolled in with its love for chrome and white laminate, Avocado Green kitchens became the punchline to a joke about bad design choices. Today, they serve as a visual reminder that what is trendy now might become embarrassing later. But green was not the only color we overcommitted to. There was another hue that infiltrated every home and overstayed its welcome, especially underfoot. Clackers were two acrylic or glass balls tied to a string and handed to children with no safety warnings and a full green light. You'd hold the middle of the string, swing the balls upward and downward until they collided above and below your hand, producing that iconic clack-clack sound. It looked simple. It sounded addictive. It was also a hazard waiting to happen. The plastic versions could chip. The glass ones could shatter. And if you missed your rhythm, one ball went rogue, swinging at eyebrow height with all the grace of a wrecking ball. Kids practiced for hours, trying to get the timing right, turning every playground into a percussion concert of risk. Parents shrugged. Teachers banned them. Hospitals stocked up on ice packs and gauze. But still, they were cool. Until one clack too many ended in sharp pieces flying through the air. Eventually, safety commissions pulled them off shelves. But back then, one broken pair just meant you were in the market for another. And if that seemed dangerous, wait till you hear about people putting flammable foam containers directly onto gas stoves like it was just another Tuesday. In the late 1970s, Vidal Sassoon was more than a brand. It was a movement. The salons, the products, the commercials. If you do not look good, we do not look good. It was bold, sharp, and full of promise. The Vidal Sassoon salons offered high-end haircuts with a modern edge. Women felt transformed. Men took notice. It was more than a trim. It was a lifestyle. You were not just getting a haircut. you were getting modernized, elevated, made new. For many, it was the first time they felt stylish instead of simply presentable. But like many trends, it struggled to evolve. The early 1980s brought new fashion rules: big hair, wild volume. Sassoon's geometric precision began to feel too rigid, too old. Franchises thinned. The elite vibe became a burden, not a benefit. Meanwhile, cheaper salons, home styling kits, and new celebrity stylists flooded the market. The salons faded. The products moved to drugstore shelves. And the name that once meant sophistication became just another bottle in the aisle. But there was a time, brief, electric, when getting your hair done at Vidal Sassoon felt like stepping into the future. And losing that future stung more than people admit. Joe's Stone Crab was situated in the busy heart of Miami Beach, Florida, and it was made by a man called Joe Weiss. What began as a humble seafood shack that was known for a pretty decent sandwich expanded into one of the biggest tourist spots of Florida in general during the 1913s. How? Well, while Stone Crab had a pretty good sandwich, it needed a bit more of a kick to get itself going, and it did that when it found the Florida Stone Crab, which was both the restaurant's namesake and its most widely demanded item. It was served cold with a mustard sauce, and it attracted foodies from every nook and cranny of America. It was also popular for being one of the few seafood places that served more than a sandwich and also didn't have any reservations policies, but the wait times were long. They also had steak options if you didn't like seafood but wanted to take the family, so they had most bases covered. They pioneered stone crab as a dish, which is now an extremely popular menu item all over America. Sunburst clocks, brass peacocks, oversized metal sculptures of sailing ships. If it glittered and could be nailed to drywall, it was probably up there. Wall decor in the 1970s took the loudest ideas from mid-century modern and cranked them past 10. The sunburst clock especially became the crown jewel of every living room, often mounted above a fireplace or a sagging plaid couch. It was supposed to say, "Sophisticated modern family," but what it actually said was, "Time stopped in 1973." These pieces aged fast. Dust built up in the corners. The faux gold finishes dulled. And eventually, people began to question why a clock needed 20 sharp metal rays stabbing out into their personal space. Like so many things from the 70s, it was a style built on boldness, and boldness is a hard thing to live with, especially when it came in shades of burnt orange and baby poop brown. The American Motors Corporation was not supposed to die. It was supposed to be the little guy that held the line. In a market dominated by giants like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, AMC dared to be different. It gave us the Gremlin, the Hornet, and the Pacer, cars that looked like nothing else on the road. But that difference came at a cost. AMC was always scrambling for cash. Its designs were bold, but sometimes too bold. The Pacer was called a fishbowl on wheels. The Gremlin looked like a prank gone too far. And while America was falling in love with fuel efficiency and sleek imports, AMC clung to its oddball identity. It tried to innovate. It partnered with Renault. It launched the Eagle, a car that would inspire the modern SUV. But none of it was enough. The market was cruel. Interest rates climbed. Gas prices jumped. AMC fell behind on everything: production, marketing, even public opinion. By the time Chrysler bought it out in the late 1980s, it was already a ghost. People do not talk much about AMC now, but they should. Because it tried. It really tried. And in the end, that might be what hurts most. Metal playground slides in the 1960s were like miniature torture devices masquerading as fun. These shiny silver beasts soared high into the sky, baking in the sun until they were hot enough to leave grill marks on your thighs. You'd climb a narrow metal ladder with no handrails, reach the top and feel the wind for about 2 seconds before gravity yanked you down at warp speed. There were no rubber mats or padded landing zones waiting at the bottom, just raw asphalt, gravel, or the occasional patch of dried-out grass. If you managed to stay seated the whole way down without getting airborne, you still had to brace for the skid at the bottom. Knees scraped, elbows bruised, and sometimes you'd ricochet right off the edge. These slides were tall, fast, and totally unforgiving. But somehow, kids lined up for another turn like it was a rite of passage. Yet for all the bumps and burns, there was something iconic about those metal slides. They were a danger you could climb, conquer, and compare bruises over. And if that wasn't risky enough, even ironing your clothes came with a silent, deadly companion hiding beneath your shirts. Woolco was supposed to be the next evolution of Woolworths. It had the size of a department store and the soul of a five and dime. Launched in the 1960s and booming into the 1970s, Woolco promised everything in one place: clothes, toys, appliances, groceries. For families used to making a dozen different stops, it felt like magic. A bright red sign that said you could get it all without going broke. But behind that promise was chaos. Poor inventory systems, outdated layouts, stores too big to manage and too cluttered to navigate. And then came the competition. Kmart, Target, Walmart. Retail giants with cleaner shelves, sharper prices, and better supply chains. Woolco could not keep up. It became the store you only visited when you had to. The store where the lights buzzed too loud and the shelves were always half empty. By the 1980s, most Woolcos had either been shut down or sold off. Some were turned into malls, others just disappeared. And with them went a small piece of how we used to shop, wandering the aisles on Saturday mornings, dreaming about toys, picking out socks with mom. Woolco was not perfect, but it was familiar, and we miss it more than we admit. Parker's is the second oldest name on this list by far. I mean, compared to the rest of the names on here, this is certifiably ancient. It was made in 1855 inside the Omni Parker House Hotel in Boston, which on its own is a pretty recognizable part of American history. It's one of America's oldest operating hotel restaurants, and the fact that it survived literally a century and more to tell its tale should let you know how successful this place really was. It was even the birthplace of some iconic regional foods, like the Boston cream pie, which was a deliciously rich pie with a unique cream filling you couldn't get anywhere else. To top that off, it had its own dish with its namesake that caught the wallets and eyes of people everywhere, which was the Parker House roll. It became extremely beloved in New England, becoming a huge part of the cuisine there, and even presidents were known to have visited the Omni Parker House Hotel just for a taste of Parker's restaurant. It blended in American menu items with French influences, something that, at the time, nobody else was doing. It makes sense that presidents visited this place, since a lot of them, like Charles Dickens and John F. Kennedy, who were regular patrons, were big fans of French cuisine too. Pea gravel patios looked charming in home improvement magazines, rustic, effortless, a little slice of the French countryside dropped into a suburban backyard. But once they were installed, the reality quickly set in. These patios were nothing more than a layer of loose, sharp-edged stones that never stayed in place. Chairs sank into them, tables wobbled, and walking barefoot was out of the question unless you had calluses like leather. Every breeze sent pebbles scattering into the grass, and lawnmowers did not take kindly to rogue gravel. Kids hated playing on it, pets tracked it indoors, and any kind of sweeping or raking turned into a full-blown yard battle. Even worse, the so-called drainage benefits rarely worked out, leaving the area soggy in winter and scorched in summer. Within a year, most patios looked patchy and uneven, like a poorly maintained construction site rather than a space for relaxation. Homeowners tried tamping the gravel down, adding edging, even gluing it in place, but nothing made it better. It was a great idea in theory, undone by the simplest problem: gravel rolls and people fall. Still, even inside the house, that same mix of fashion and frustration kept showing up, especially in the form of a curtain that was not quite a wall and not quite anything useful at all. Home hair dryers in the 1960s looked like they came straight from a beauty salon, but without any of the safety checks. These early models had bulky hoods or handheld nozzles, often with thick cords that frayed faster than a worn shoelace. You'd plug them into the wall, perch near the bathroom sink, and hope for the best. No ground wires, no insulation. Just you, your wet hair, and a live current a sneeze away from disaster. The metal casing got hot. The motors sparked occasionally. And heaven help you if your fingers were damp. Water plus faulty wiring? That hairdo could turn into a fireworks show. Yet people trusted them because that sleek salon look felt worth the risk. Back then, it was just another day in the name of glamour. But if electricity was playing with fire, what we put directly on wounds wasn't much better, especially when it came in a bright red bottle with a mercury surprise. Which 90s flop was your favorite fail? Drop it in the comments, tap like, and subscribe for more nostalgic misfires.